The dust coated everything, a fine, persistent shroud clinging to the peeling paint of the general store, the warped wood of the boardwalk, the very air she breathed. Alara pulled the threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, the ruffle scratching her cheek. 19 years. 19 years since they had shipped her away like chattel, a burden shed, her worth measured in coin and convenience. The memories clawed at her throat, acrid and hot. The cold eyes, the casual dismissal, the feeling of being less than human, an object to be moved, used, forgotten. Hatred was a stone in her gut, heavy and sharp, fueled by the biting wind and the familiar, indifferent faces that populated this forgotten corner of the world. She had come back, not for comfort, not for belonging, but because the phantom weight of their contempt had become a physical ache, one only presence could confront. The town was smaller than she remembered, meaner, huddled against the vast, unforgiving landscape like a scab. People averted their gazes or stared too long, their eyes holding questions she wouldn't answer, judgments she disdained. They saw the girl who was sent away, perhaps whispered about what that meant, what she had become. Let them. Their whispers were the static she had learned to ignore. Her focus was narrower, sharper. She knew who was still here, the ones whose choices had carved the path she was forced to walk. Finding work was hard. Her youth was seen as a liability, her guarded silence as insolence. She ended up at the edge of town, helping Mrs. Gable with laundry. The scalding water and harsh lie a fitting penance for a past she hadn't chosen but couldn't escape. It was backbreaking, mind-numbing work, but it bought her sparse meals and a corner in the stable to sleep. The horses were better company than people. Their needs were simple, honest. They didn't judge the dirt under her fingernails or the haunted look in her eyes. She saw him sometimes. Silas. He worked at the livery, quiet, solitary, his face weathered and unreadable. He was an outsider too in his own way. The townsfolk tolerated him because he was useful, competent with horses and repairs, but they kept their distance. There were rumors, something about his past, a darkness he carried. Alara felt a flicker of reluctant kinship. He understood isolation. He didn't stare. His presence was like the rocks on the distant mesa, solid, ancient, indifferent to the transient dramas of the town. One evening, as she stumbled back to the stable, the cold biting deep, a group of young men, flushed with drink, blocked her path. Their words were slurred, cruel, echoing the contempt she knew so well. They spoke of the girl who came back, of what she must have done, what she might do. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the layer of hatred. She was alone, vulnerable, just as she had been then. Their laughter seemed to fill the night, pressing in on her. But then, a shadow detached itself from the livery wall. Silas. He didn't speak, just stood there, his arms crossed, his gaze steady and directed at the men. There was a quiet authority in his stillness that brooked no argument. The laughter faltered. The men exchanged uneasy glances, mumbled curses, and dispersed, melting back into the town's dim light. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge the silent intervention. He just turned and went back into the stable, leaving her standing in the sudden, charged silence, the fear slowly receding, replaced by a confusing mix of gratitude and a prickle of curiosity about the man who offered protection without expectation. Weeks turned into months. The routine of labor, the gnawing cold, the persistent dust, all blended into a monotonous test of endurance. Alara watched Silas from a distance. He was a man of few words, his movements economical and skilled. He fixed a broken fence, calmed a skittish mare, mended a harness, all with quiet competence. He ate alone, usually near the stable entrance, whittling wood or simply watching the horizon. She noticed small things. The careful way he handled injured animals, the lines of tension around his mouth even when he was relaxed, the depth of the silence that seemed to surround him. He was not unkind, but he was also not inviting. Their interactions were limited to shared space in the stable, brief, necessary exchanges about the horses. One frigid morning, a blizzard blew in unexpectedly, burying the town in snow. The stable, while offering shelter, wasn't proof against the bitter cold that seeped through the walls. Alara shivered uncontrollably in her corner, the thin blanket useless. Silas was tending to a sick horse. He saw her shivering, his gaze lingering for just a moment. Without a word, he finished with the horse, went to his small cot in another part of the stable, and returned with an extra blanket, thicker and warmer than hers. He laid it over her without looking directly at her, then returned to his work. The gesture was small, pragmatic, devoid of sentiment, yet it landed with the force of a blow against her carefully constructed defenses. It was a simple act of shared necessity, perhaps, but it was also an acknowledgement of her presence, her need. Her internal landscape remained a battlefield. The burning hatred was still there, banked but ready to flare. She thought of them, the ones who had discarded her, imagined them facing the hardships she endured daily. The desire for some form of redress, some way to make them understand the depth of the wound, was a constant undercurrent. But survival demanded her full attention. The harsh reality of her daily life, the constant struggle against the elements, against hunger, against the low-level hostility of the town, began to temper the pure fire of vengeance. It was hard to focus solely on the past when the present demanded every ounce of strength she possessed. The cautious truce between her and Silas deepened, built on shared vulnerability to the weather and the unspoken understanding of being an outsider. Sometimes, during the worst of the storm, they would sit near the lantern, the only source of warmth, in silence. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was watchful, allowing for observation without the pressure of performance. She saw the weariness in his eyes, the subtle shifts in his posture that spoke of old injuries or burdens. He, she sensed, saw the raw edges of her pain, the tension in her shoulders, the way she flinched at sudden noises. Neither pressed. Trust wasn't given. It was earned, slowly, through observed action and a mutual respect for the other's solitude. The world outside the stable seemed distant, the town's judgments muffled by the storm. Inside, a quiet, fragile alliance was beginning to form, not on words, but on the shared breath in the cold air and the mutual reliance on the flimsy shelter against the indifferent fury of the world. The hatred hadn't vanished, but it no longer occupied every corner of her mind. Space was being made, for cold, for hunger, for the quiet presence of another solitary soul. The thaw came, bringing with it a fresh wave of mud and the return of familiar threats. Among the faces that reemerged from winter's hibernation was Jedediah. He was one of them, not the worst but complicit part of the system that had judged and discarded her. Now he ran the mercantile, sleek and prosperous, his eyes holding the same casual indifference she remembered. Seeing him brought the banked fires of hatred roaring back. He represented the comfortable world that had cast her out into the cold. He saw her, too, paused, a flicker of recognition, then a dismissive look that said everything she needed to know. She was still nothing to him. The town's hostility towards Silas also seemed to sharpen with the good weather. Whispers grew louder, more pointed. Something about property, about disputed land, about a man found dead years ago. Alara didn't understand the details, but she understood the undercurrent of suspicion and dislike that had always surrounded him. It was the same force that had tried to bury her. One afternoon, a conflict erupted near the livery. Jedediah, flanked by two heavy-set men, was confronting Silas. Their voices were loud, accusatory. Something about Silas trespassing on land, Jedediah claimed. Land Silas apparently used for grazing a few horses he was looking after. The argument escalated quickly. Jedediah, emboldened by his companions, grew aggressive, pushing Silas. Silas remained silent, his face a mask, but his body was coiled, watchful. Alara, fetching water nearby, froze. This wasn't just a dispute. It felt like a deliberate provocation, a way to isolate and corner the man who had offered her a silent kindness. The same cruel currents that had swept her away were now targeting him. She saw the moment the situation turned dangerous. Jedediah's men moved to block Silas's retreat. One reached for a club tucked into his belt. Instinct, sharp and sudden, overruled caution. It wasn't just about Silas. It was about standing against the casual cruelty, the assumption of power over others that these men represented. It was about the years of being powerless, of being treated like an object. Dropping the water bucket with a clatter, she stepped forward. "Leave him be, Jedediah." Her voice was low, trembling slightly, but clear enough to cut through the tension. All heads turned to her. Jedediah's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with contempt. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," he sneered. "The little stray's got claws now, does she?" Still defending strays. Silas? His words were designed to belittle, to reduce her to her past, to the rumors. Silas's gaze met hers for a fraction of a second. A flash of surprise, then a steady, unwavering look that communicated more than words ever could. It was a shared recognition of the forces arrayed against them, a silent pact formed in the face of danger. The distraction was all Silas needed. In a blur of motion, he disarmed the man with the club and used the leverage to send Jedediah stumbling back. But the other man lunged. Alara didn't think. She grabbed a pitchfork leaning against the stable wall, its tines glinting dully. She didn't swing it wildly. She held it defensively, positioning herself between Silas and the remaining aggressor, her stance defiant. She was small, but she was no longer an object to be ignored or pushed aside. The man hesitated, momentarily thrown by the unexpected resistance from the girl everyone dismissed. Silas took advantage of the opening, delivering a swift, precise blow that incapacitated him. Jedediah, seeing his plan fail and his men downed, scrambled back, his face a mixture of rage and fear. "This isn't over," he spat, backing away with his injured companions. Silas and Alara stood side by side, the pitchfork held steady in her hands, Silas watchful, silent. The confrontation was short, brutal, and illuminating. Alara hadn't hunted them down. She had stood her ground, defending herself and the man who had quietly shown her kindness, against the embodiment of the system that had broken her. The burning hatred was still there, but it had been transmuted, sharpened into a fierce, protective resolve. She was no longer just a victim. She was a force to be reckoned with. The aftermath of the confrontation settled over the town like a shroud. The whispers turned into open speculation, the contempt now mixed with grudging fear. Alara and Silas became, in the eyes of the townsfolk, even more intertwined, two outsiders who had dared to push back. The incident hadn't brought the grand revenge she might once have dreamt of, but it had been a victory nonetheless, a defiant assertion of her right to exist, to defend, to be more than just an object. That evening, by the flickering lantern light in the stable, the silence between them was different. It was still comfortable, but it held a new weight of shared experience, of having faced danger together. Silas tended to a cut on his arm, his movements slow. Alara watched him, the pitchfork now leaning innocently against the wall. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling small but significant in the quiet. Silas finished wrapping his arm, finally looking at her. His eyes, usually so guarded, held a flicker of something she couldn't quite name, respect, perhaps, or a shared understanding that ran deeper than words. "Didn't have to do that," he rumbled, his voice low and rough. "Yes, I did," she replied simply. It was the truth. Her past had taught her the cost of silence, the price of letting others dictate her worth. Standing with him had felt like reclaiming a piece of herself, a vital breath after years of suffocation. He nodded slowly, accepting her answer. There was no need for lengthy explanations, for recounting past hurts or motivations. They saw the truth in each other's actions. The world outside remained harsh. The people who had wronged her still existed, but the consuming fire of hatred had changed. It had been a source of destructive energy, but facing the real, immediate threat, standing shoulder to shoulder with another soul who understood marginalization, had forged the heat into something stronger, more tempered, resilience. She looked at Silas, at the quiet strength emanating from him, the man who had offered a blanket, who had stood against bullies, who accepted her unexpected defense without question. The loneliness that had been her constant companion felt less absolute. She hadn't found a place to belong, perhaps, but she had found a fellow traveler on the difficult path, a partnership built on quiet observation and shared defiance. Her return had been fueled by the burning desire to confront the past, to make them pay for treating her like an object. But the journey had led her somewhere unexpected. The true confrontation wasn't about seeking out those who had harmed her. It was about reclaiming her own humanity in the face of their dehumanization. It was about finding her strength not in vengeance, but in survival, in connection, in refusing to be broken. The past was a scar, but it no longer defined her entirely. She was Alara, a woman who had faced down contempt and danger, standing tall in the dusty, indifferent world. The hatred was still a memory, a reminder, but resilience was the force that now moved her forward, a quiet, enduring flame in the heart of the storm. She had returned, not to hunt them down, but to build herself up, piece by piece, in the wreckage they had left behind. And in doing so, she had found a form of justice far more profound than any revenge could offer.